This is, I believe, the most important thing, or one of the most important things going on in the world right now that the world doesn't know about. That's basically it. It starts in a very unlikely place, if you don't know anything about it. Mexico, about 1930. About 100 miles southwest of Chihuahua, this area right in here. A family of Mexican Americans from El Paso, just on the other border of Ciudad Juarez. The family was of Mexican heritage. The parents had snuck in, they had become citizens, they were taking their kids back to the home village for the first time, and one of the kids was a teenage girl, 13, 14, 15, she couldn't remember in later life. And when they got to the area where the village was, it was like this, high desert region, kind of like America's Grand Canyon, near the Copper Canyon area of Mexico, which is less known, but this is kind of how it looks, dry, high desert. Got to the village and was told by the people there, the kids, do not go in the mine tunnels or the caves in this area. That is taboo, that is forbidden, and it is just flat dangerous, don't do it, all right? Being a typical American teenager, as soon as she was told what not to do, she snuck off as soon as she could to taste the forbidden fruit. She took a big basket with her to claim she was going to pick fruit, but she was just going to explore and look for the caves and mine tunnels. Some considerable distance away, she said, from the village, she found an abandoned mine tunnel. Now this is very similar to it. This used as it's the only picture I've found like it, but it's used as a home now. But this is, you know, imagine in your mind, this is what she found. And she went in. And when she went in, she saw about some 50 feet in, she could still see clear enough from the light outside, a skeleton, a human skeleton lying on its back. She was not really freaked out or anything like you would think a kid would be, because in the El Paso dry region like that, bones of dogs, cats, anything don't really go away. So she had seen plenty, and she had also seen the skeleton hanging on the rod in the biology class at the junior high school. We all had that then, maybe you still do now. So she got a little closer, and as she got closer, she saw that skeleton was lying beside a mound of dirt that looked to her like a grave. Got a little closer, and she saw what she called a misshapen hand, a misshapen skeletal hand sticking out of the dirt. And that hand was wrapped around the upper arm bone of the person lying on the dirt. Now, what she didn't understand at the moment was that whatever was in the grave had been buried by the person there, and that person had left the hand out and wrapped it around her own arm, laid down, wrapped it around her own arm, and killed herself. So that her skeleton would be found there with it, with the arm wrapped around. Very dramatic, very romantic kind of thing, kind of event, whatever it was. She didn't know, she didn't care. What she cared about was that she noticed that the grave looked pretty fresh. The dirt looked crumbly on it. Wasn't compacted at all. And it wouldn't be in a mine tunnel. There'd be no rain to fall on it, nothing to compact it. And so with her bare hand, she scraped it loose to see what was in there, followed the hand down, and sure enough, there was a whole skeleton there. So she said that it was smaller than the one lying on the dirt, which we determined by the size of the head was about 5 feet tall, very typical, common size for Mexicans today. 5 feet, they're short people as a rule. And later, I'll just jump ahead and say that we found out from carbon-14 dating that they were 900 years old, and 900 years ago, 5 feet would be a very average height. So 5 feet, we're happy with that. And she said the other one was noticeably smaller. We assume it was about 4 feet tall. 4 feet tall. Okay, so she gets the bright idea, I'm going to take both of these skeletons. Oh, and by the way, the smaller one she said was misshapen. That was the only word that she gave, and I'll explain later in a moment why misshapen. Misshapen body. Misshapen hand, misshapen head, misshapen body. She got the bright idea that she was going to take them both back, sneak them both back into the States, do something with them, maybe donate them to her school or something like that, and she'd be like a hero or something. Typical kid thought. She bundled all the bones into the basket with the idea of recovering them. But she didn't really have a plan. This is what she found. Skeletons found in the mine tunnel, the hand coming out. Should have done that. All right, so she didn't have a plan. She came to a ravine like this, whoops, and she found a tree here with roots exposed. Tree up on the bank with roots underneath exposed, perfect place, perfect hiding place. To give her some time to think through what she was going to do with the bones of the skeletons. So she packed them up in there, no problem, going to give herself a couple days to work out a plan, and then she was going to come back and pick them up. That night, torrential rain started to fall. Fell for 2 days. 2 days, 2 full days. Very likely a hurricane dropping its load in that area, as they will do when they come in off the Pacific. So, third day when she was able to get out there and take a look, she found out why the tree was undercut. It was undercut because these things fill up with flash flood ravine waters fill a ravine and flash flood and carve it out. They were all gone, bones gone. And so she decided, well, maybe something washed up downstream, and she walked a little ways, and in some bushes she found the 2 skulls and the piece of maxilla of the one that she thought was deformed, the one that was misshapen. And they had been damaged in the tumble from where she left them down the stream to where she found them. The normal looking one, which I will call the human, what it was, the left zygomatic arch cheekbone was broken off. The jaws, the lower jaws were gone with both, because your lower jaws are not attached to your head. And the face of the misshapen one had been very damaged. The front part of it was gone, the nose part was gone, and both zygomatic arches were gone. But the upper piece, upper right maxilla, this was still there. So that's what she had. She gave them ultimately, she brought them home, went ahead, jumped ahead there. I'm rushing, sorry. She brought them home to El Paso, got them in, no problem, snuck them in fine, and then decided to just keep them, because she didn't have the skeletons, as souvenirs. Keep them as souvenirs of this trip and this exciting adventure that she had. She assumed the misshapen one was a deformity, and that was it. She made a cardboard box to keep them, and she kept them for the rest of her life. In the early 90s, when she found out that she was dying, that she was terminal, she had married a man who was a U.S. Border Patrol agent. He, though nothing was illegal about these things, he just, like some people, wasn't comfortable with skulls in the box in the garage. So she knew that, so she asked a couple of friends, would you would get rid of a dear pet, you know, if you knew you were dying? Would these friends take care of them? And they said, yeah, sure, no problem. What are you going to say to a dying woman? But the man of that couple was an FBI agent. He wasn't that comfortable with them either. So he and his wife kept them for 5 years, and they found a younger couple, ironically named Ray and Melanie Young, this pair, Ray and Melanie Young of El Paso, Texas. And they thought Melanie and Ray would be okay with it, because Ray is an electrical engineer working for the power company there. And Melanie had been a neonatal nurse for about 20 years. So Melanie was very familiar with and comfortable with human deformities. Not a problem. And they said, sure, we'll take them. Not an issue. Bring them over. They brought them over. Ray and Melanie saw them. Melanie picked it up, and she felt, as you will feel, how light it was. And she said, this is not right. And she looked at it, and she saw how symmetrical it was. She said, this is not right. This is not the way deformity is. It doesn't just take away the weight of the thing, and it doesn't completely change everything, and yet still have it be symmetrical, because she couldn't see any really good corollaries between what a human is, and what this thing was. So right away she knew there was something special and very unusual about this, but more importantly, she and Ray were members of El Paso MUFON. What a coincidence. Mutual UFO Network, the largest organization of UFO alien people in the States. There are chapters in various cities, various large cities, and El Paso had one. So Ray and Melanie Young knew about aliens, and they knew what a gray was supposed to look like. And Melanie looked at it and she said, you know, Ray, this head could go easily in the skull of a gray. It's got everything it needs. You know, the standard description is a heart-shaped face. Upper part here, larger, crease down the middle, dent down the middle, and then a very, very small lower face, heart-shaped face. She said, I think it's a gray. And he said, you know, you're right, it could be that. Why don't we get it tested? And she said, for it. So they contacted me because when they asked around in the MUFON who knew more about skulls than anybody in the field of research at that time of alternative knowledge, my name came up because of my work with human origins and hominoids, Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, all that. That's what I was talking about. I was not a UFO alien person. I believed in them, but I wasn't that fascinated with them. I was fascinated with hominoids and human origins. So I was way behind the learning curve as far as what I needed to know to do this, but they invited me to El Paso to take a look. I did. I knew enough about skulls to know what she knew. It was too light, too symmetrical, too weird, and something needed to be done. So I said, let's take it out, and I believe I'll have an answer for you when science sees how bizarre these things are, particularly how bizarre this one is. Oops, sorry. We'll have their interest, and we should have an answer maybe within 6 months. I'm talking to you now 10 years and 4 months later, which shows you how much I knew. It was a much, much more difficult task than I ever imagined it would be. But nonetheless, this is the Starchild, and as you see, it is very different. Starting with the eye sockets, and this is the piece of maxilla that we'll see in just a moment. But as you look at it, and as you'll see, and I say you'll see because when this lecture's over, we'll have the skulls out on the book table out there for you. And they're not the skulls, they're not the real ones, but they're stereolithographic copies of a typical human skull, very similar to the one of that human that you see right there, but not an exact copy of her, but an exact copy of the Starchild skull. And when I mean exact, I mean exact. The exact same weight, exact same size, as exact as technology can make it, and painted to look like it. Very similar. You can hold it, take pictures, don't hog it, take your turn, queue up, go through, but you can hold each one. I urge you, hold the human first so you get a feel of the difference of the weight of it. Because that's what jumps out at everybody. And it jumped out at us, it'll jump out at you. It's really amazing. The bone is half as thin as normal. You see how thin it is if you look right here. Uniformly, all around, and half as thick. I mean, half as thick and weighs half as much. So, very unusual. Now, here's the way it looks when you put this maxilla piece in the position where it basically would go. That's the nose, the curve of the nasal opening right there. 2 teeth here. You see how it would have looked. This staining, by the way, is just where the chewing muscles go, and why it's stained that way and into that eye socket is just part of the dirt that it was buried in, mixed with the fluids of the body as the body decomposed. Nothing special about that. We've analyzed it, and that's what we've come up with. So what happened was I took it out and I began to get informed opinion from specialists who knew what they were talking about. I should tell you that I would talk to about 1 in 10 that I would try to get to discuss it with me. Most of them would tell me, oh, it's a cradle-boarded hydrocephalic, get it out of here, I don't want to deal with it. Cradle-boarded hydrocephalic, or anything they could think of to just get me out of the room. They didn't want to deal with it. But 1 in 10 would say, oh, wow, this is interesting. And sometimes they would let me use their names and sometimes not. You know, they'd say, well, I'll tell you what I know, but you can't use my name. Or, I'm getting ready to retire in a couple of years. I don't need to worry about it. You can use my name. So that was pretty much how it went. Okay, so what we have here is, oops, sorry, a look at the eye sockets and the cheekbones. I want to talk about that for a minute because that's really interesting. You see how this cheekbone in a human being folds into the eye socket and makes a part of the eye socket. You rip it out, you're ripping out a piece of the eye socket. Complete redesign here, it just ripped off at a very thin line right there. Very, very different, and this is just the start of all these physiological differences in which it doesn't match up with human at all, not at all. All right, an eye socket of a normal human is that deep, 2 inches, 2 inches. And back at the back, as you see, are the optic nerve and the optic frame and openings where the vessels and the nerves come in that control the movement of the eyeball. In the Starchild, it's about that deep, not quite 1 knuckle at its deepest point. And as you see, the foramens have been shoved down into the middle and down low middle of the nose. So if it's got eyes even remotely like ours, they're going to be much lower in the face, sort of centered down here, instead of where our eyes are centered. And if you feel in this part right here, it's rounded and it goes up because our eye sockets hold a much bigger eyeball in our heads than we look at when we look at each other's eyes. That's so that when you get hit really hard, your eyes, like in a cartoon, your eyes don't just stay there and your body goes back. Your eyes go with you. They have to be held in your head. If that has eyes anything approaching ours, they're sticking off like frog eyes. And as you know, you're not going to make it past age 3 or 4 without one of your buddies knocking your eyes out of your head as you're playing. So it's got different eyes. We don't know what it's got, but it doesn't have eyes like ours. This is completely different up here. If you feel it's like an edge rather than that rounded thing going in, and you can feel that on them as well. All right, this is a close-up of the eye sockets, and I can assure you, you can look at those eye sockets as much as you want. You cannot see a change in the terrain. You cannot see it. But if you stick your finger right here or right here, you'll feel a dent. You can kind of see where the staining of so many people doing it. And then if you drag your finger over here, you'll feel a rise, a very subtle rise, and you'll sink back into another little pit here. It's incredible. So incredibly precisely symmetrical. It cannot be deformity. It cannot be the result of a deformity. It's perfect. It's more perfect than we are in most of its parts, more symmetrical than we are. That is the result of its genes telling it to grow differently from us. It's got different genes right across the board from what we have. All right? This is a profile view. Now, there's a lot of things to talk about here, first of which is you see the different parts of the skull, and first thing to mention is that the female, and we know she was a female, so I'm going to call her the female from now on, the female that was found with it had a concussion to her left parietal that healed. She went on and lived her life, but it's there. No problems, no concussions, nothing like that with. I'm now going to explain to you the Starchild. I'll go into the reasons why that name came about, but I'm going to call it the Starchild from now on because it's easier for me. The Starchild skull. All right, you see this bone right here, the pterygoid plate. People say, well, what is that weird bone? When they see it, they say, what's those two weird bones sticking out like that? What they are is they're just brace bones. That's all they are. They brace your maxilla, this part of your face, from jamming back into your neck and killing you if you take a real hard shot in the mouth. They're holding it out so that it doesn't collapse in and kill you, hurt your spine, paralyze you, kill you, okay? That's all they do. But what this shows you is how much smaller this one is than this one. It's about half the size. And everything you're going to see indicates an incredibly small lower face relative to ours. You see the ear holes, ear hole. You see the mastoid bone, that's this one right here. And in general, you see that the rear of this head is flat because it has been cradle boarded. Remember I said that scientists would say, oh, the Starchild is just cradle boarded hydrocephalic, forget about it, don't worry about it, it's routine, there's nothing special about it. Okay, well that's not exactly true, and as we'll see, but anyway, with this one it is cradle boarded. Now, we're going to talk about cradle boarding in a minute, but the key point to notice is that it stops at the inion. You're flat here from the crown where a board rests. You tie the head to a board, and it stops at the inion. Now, I want you all to just stop for a minute and feel the inion, because this is real important. Get oriented on it. It's this knot that we all have back here at the back of our heads. Every human has that. Everybody. It's where your neck attaches to your skull. Every chimp has that, every gorilla has that, every monkey has that. If you have a head on a neck, you have an inion of some sort or another, except for the Starchild, which has none. And not only does it have no inion, does it not have a bump, it has a dent, a precise dent in that area. Very strange. Its neck is completely different, as we'll see in a minute. So it has a missing inion, but this is flat, perfectly flat as this table. Because what cradle boarding is, it's when a mother in a primitive society has a baby and has to go right to work as soon as possible after. She can't have her baby on her back with its head lolling around like this as she moves and does her work, because its neck will be hurt. So they strap them to a board and they just tie the head down. They don't do anything more than that. They just tie the head so it'll stay where it is. In doing that, because a baby's bones are so soft, it flattens the rear of the head as flat as the board that it's on. So the back of the human found with the Starchild, the back of her head is absolutely as flat as that table when you feel it with your hands. The Starchild is absolutely not. You can see the convolutions here, but it has all of its natural convolutions. It was never cradle boarded. And when I say this sincerely. A moron can take one look at it and see that it was never cradle boarded, and yet I can't tell you how many experts that I've talked to that look me right in the eye and say it's cradle boarded. You know, just absurd. Absurd beyond absurd. And you start trying to argue with them and say, well, it can't be. And they just say, it is, get out. And that's it. That is the way it works. Anyway, so this is a typical cradle board, so that you see the strap, just so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. Papooses, you know, but it goes back cultures all over the world, and it goes back for hundreds of years. No difference. Now, hydrocephaly. Let's talk about hydrocephaly for a minute. That's the other part of the thing, because they see that bulgy head and they say, oh, that's water on the brain. It's got to be. You know, Occam's razor, the simplest answer is always the best answer. And so they dive in for that simplest answer, which is hydrocephaly to make the swelling of the head and cradle boarding to make the rear of the head, even though the evidence is totally against that. Hydrocephaly, as you see, causes pressure. Sure enough, it's the lack of the inability of the spinal fluid that gets in the brain to drain back out. It just collects. And it builds and builds until there's enough pressure for the brain to be pushed out of the foramen magnum, the neck hole, and kills them. Now, that used to be a death sentence back in the old days. Now they can shunt it and you'll live, and sometimes you hardly even know it's happened when it's done really well. So in this case, in these cases rather, as you can see, it doesn't change. The swelling can be in different areas. It can be in the front, it can be the sides, it can be in the rear, it can be the top. Wherever the bone is weakest is where, but it doesn't change the rest of the face. Doesn't change the eye sockets, doesn't take away the inion, doesn't change the positioning of the neck. It doesn't change the thickness of the bone, of the rest of it, from wherever the swelling occurs. It doesn't turn it into something other than a human. It's not, the Starchild is not hydrocephaly. It's not hydrocephaly, it's not cradle boarding. All right, this is the rear, and as you see, there's a very different design back here. These are the bones, the parietals, the occipital, and this is the inion area right here, the knot, and you see these two areas of the fossa where the big muscles, neck muscles attach, and you see that on the Starchild, this is the inion that's missing that I told you about. That circular area right there is a dent, and there the fossa, instead of being up here where they belong, are down here, and the bone has been stretched up and flattened out, but naturally there. And here too you also see the crease. Now, the crease is something else that hydrocephaly does not allow, because the pressure is uniform out everywhere. It would not lead to a crease unless there was a premature suture back there. If this, prematurely fused or unnaturally fused suture right here. Now the sutures, I hope you all know that when you're born, this is not how you look. There's bone here, bone here, bone here, but all the middle part is ligament, so that you can squeeze out the birth canal and then your head can reshape into its normal shape. And then over the next 2-3 years, it all connects itself, and the last part to connect is this triple junction right up here at the top, the baby's soft spot, right? So that you see that the Starchild is very well sutured, and these things here that people look at and they say, what are those? Those are called Wormian bones or islands. They're perfectly normal. When one side fuses before another, the other side has to fill in, and that's how it does it. Nothing odd, but they're weird to look at if you don't know what they are. But this, as far as this suturing goes, premature closing, one of the first things we did was check out to make sure that wasn't a part of it, and it wasn't. And we'll see the test results of that later. But just trust me, it's not cradle boarding, it's not hydrocephaly, and yet when you go and you look at criticisms of it, that's what you'll see from the critics and the skeptics. Just, it's a cradle boarded hydrocephalic, forget about it. Very frustrating. This is the slide just to show that the convolutions are very clear, both visually and with your hands. You can see it was never cradle boarded. All right, this is the top view, and this shows you the area that I was talking about with the soft spot, the triple juncture. And here you get a really good view of the crease area that would provide that heart-shaped dent in the face that would lead you to believe it was a gray alien. Now, this is the underside. This is an interesting area, interesting look. Remember, I told you that the zygomatic arch is broken off on the human, but you see the complete one here, and you see that these stubs right here are the broken part. The little throw would be much closer here. We'll see this in a minute. But this area right here is called the basilar part, and it's important for you to understand this. The basilar part is just missing on the Starchild, missing. Now, why? The basilar part is one of the last parts of your skull to fuse. It does it between the age of 20 and 25. So one can make an argument that the Starchild died before the age of 20 or 25, and that this just dropped out in the process just like the jawbone would because it wasn't really connected. Or you could make the argument that it was indeed fused, but that in the tumble down that took out the face and knocked out the zygomatic arches and all that, whatever it slammed into or was pushed into, took that out as well. We have no way to know because that wouldn't be a real strong connection there in any case. So that's one argument. Now what we're going to look at next is the neck area. Now as we see, we have two very different necks. This is a standard human neck form and area, and this is the Starchild. So we see that it's greatly reduced in area and shape. Very different neck. Okay? This is the back side view of it, looking at where the inion would have been, and the fossa connection of the neck, and so it gives you the very clear. And this is the real one, and this is the model that you'll be holding. So you see it's pretty close as we can get it. And this is the two areas of the neck connections, and you see how much smaller the neck of the Starchild is. Completely different. Now this is the zygomatic arches, the cheekbones. Now with the normal human, you can get about 2 fingers up through that, and what that is just a mass of muscle. It's your chewing muscles going up through there, and they're going to spread out on the side of your head and attach. With Starchild, as you can see, that's maybe 2 good-sized drinking straws, soda straws that would go through there. A much tighter, much closer fit from all we can tell from the structure of the base of it. Now the balance points, this is really important and really interesting. The balance point of a human head is a little bit back of center, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches back of the dead center point. Why? Because the front of our faces are empty for the most part. There's a lot of empty area here. There are sinuses, big deep sinuses, frontal sinuses that go here. There's big deep eye sockets that go in here. There's our nasal passages, there's our mouth. So it's a skinny guy and a fat guy on a seesaw. You got to move the fulcrum back to make it work. All right? So that's what's happened here, and you have that balance point like that. Now with the Starchild, very different. As you will see later, but trust me when I tell you, there are no sinuses in here. No frontal sinuses at all, not even a shred of a sinus. Absolutely gone. Very shallow eye sockets. We're not sure about the nose, but we know the mouth, what we have is very small mouth. So the balance point is shifted. Plus there's a lot more brain in here, as you can see, in a different position, so the balance point has to go forward. If this is a deformity, you know, how does it know? How does it know to do that? How does it know to fix everything that's out of whack to put them back in whack so this thing can live? Very, very strange. Now, another thing to keep in mind is these are physically the same size. The same size. They're both smallish. The human skull is, as I said, about a 5-foot tall adult, about a 12-year-old average person. If we were here, if our skulls were here, these two are the same, ours would be a little bit bigger. Bigger to the extent that this should be, and in fact is, by measurement, about 1,200 cubic centimeters of brain. It holds about 1,200 cubic centimeters of brain. If our brains were in here, they would hold about 1,400 cubic centimeters of brain. That's the average, 1,400 cubic centimeters. The Starchild should be 1,200 cubic centimeters. Should be. Thank you. But as instead of being 1,200, it is 1,600 cubic centimeters of brain. 1,600, fully 1/3 more, 200 more than us, and we don't know how it's in there. We don't know how it fits. Because yes, the bone is thinner. That accounts for some. Yes, the sinuses are gone. That accounts for more. Yes, the eye sockets are shallow. That accounts for more. But also, this is very much expanded, but this is very much reduced. We don't get it. We don't really get it. But there's a lot of brain packed in there, wall-to-wall brain, according to putting seed in and pouring it out and measuring it. Very strange. All right, another thing that's very interesting about it is this. The cerebellum of a human being fits here, and it's about 10% of the brain, but it has about 80% of the neurons. It is you. It is everything that runs you other than your thinking parts. Your thinking is all up in here, but what runs your breathing, your heartbeat, the changing of your cells, your software package, this is it. It is the most important part. This goes, you go. Got to take care of that, and nature has. It's got the thickest part of bone right here. It's in the curve at the back of your head. You got all those neck muscles laid in on top of it from here around. It is protected because it has to be. But also inside, there are flanges of bone that come out from a bump. You see this bump outside? There are bumps in here, flanges, that hold it in place. Because it has to hold 3 pounds up on top of it, pressing down for the course of your life without getting bent out of shape. Nature has taken care of your cerebellum because it is you, okay? So, as you see the way it works, the pressure comes down from the brain right here, and it's right into the support package, right into the bone and the flanges of bone that hold it in place. But with the Starchild, we see a completely different setup. Because of the squeeze back here, it has to be, if it's here even, it has to be like this shape, so you've got all this pressure from here, but you've got all this extra pressure piling down on it right there. And guess what? Those flanges of bone, they're nubbed down to almost nothing. So when I had a brain specialist, first brain specialist that really looked at this and really gave it a going over, he said, look, this is crazy. This brain should have come sliding out of the foramen magnum hole like a kid down a slipper slide. It shouldn't be this way. It should have just squeezed out just from the weight of it. So he said, I think this thing probably doesn't have a cerebellum the way we have, or it doesn't have brain consistency of ours, because if it was a brain like ours, it would have flowed out. The kid never should have made it past kidhood. He says, I don't get it. And nobody else does either. It's another one of those great mysteries about the Starchild. Okay, here are the chewing muscles, and as we said, 2 fingers up through here, and you can just, in the real ones, you can just see the line very clearly of where they stop attaching, but that's it. And with the Starchild, as you see, greatly reduced, like with the neck, about half the size. Greatly reduced chewing muscles, much smaller lower face. Now, this is really interesting. This is the surface of standard human bone, and you all know the story about we change our cells out except for our brain cells every 7 years. Every 7 years we're new people because our cells are always changing. This is part of that process. Some of the bone cells go into some of these holes, some of the cells come out of the other holes, and that's how they swap out. Perfectly normal. Now, if you're going to make a deformity, what on earth are you going to take them away for? Well, how's Mother Nature going to do that? What's the point? Again, very, very different with the Starchild. All right, now here we see the piece of maxilla. Now this purple stuff, don't worry about it. That was just when we were taking pictures of it, and we had made a model of it to copy it and do all that. Don't worry about it. But here we see the 2 teeth, and we see the size of it. 1 inch. And there's more here, so it would have been more than 1 inch. But nonetheless, the roof is flat. The roof of the mouth is flat, indicating a very small tongue or even no tongue at all. So something to talk about is what Rich Dolan was talking about a minute ago, which is the telepathy. Look what we have here. We have a huge brain, we have no sinuses, we have a little neck, and we have a very small mouth. Where do the sinuses fit into this? What are your sinuses good for, do you suppose? I bet every one of you think it has to do with breathing, cleaning the air, warming the air, do something like that. No, there's a layer of bone connecting. It has nothing to do with that. Guess what it's for? It just allows your voice to resonate. If I didn't have sinuses at all, my voice would sound something like this. I would be more like a robot sounding thing because there would be no resonance to my voice. You with me? So, if you've got all of that going against your speaking, no sinuses, maybe no tongue, little bitty neck, huge brain, what does that indicate maybe? Communication with telepathy. I can't say it, I can't swear to it, I can't prove it, but you know, what a combination of effects. Pretty interesting. Now, with all of these physical things that people told me about, physiological differences, and I'm just giving you the highlights, there's a couple of dozen and more. but these are the ones that are important. There were also tests. We did tests, and this was the first one we did was x-rays. Now this is after we had pulled one of the teeth, but it's a better shot than the first x-ray. But what you see is teeth in the top, and teeth in the bottom. Teeth here, ready to come down. When we had that x-ray, the x-ray technician said, oh man, you got teeth down, you got teeth up, that's a kid. 5, 6 years old, that's a kid. So we said, okay, called it the Starchild. Huge mistake, monster mistake, because from that point on, I couldn't at first say, what it was, because if ever I mentioned the word Starchild, scientists would say, oh, well, you've already concluded that it's an alien. We know, we don't want anything to do with an alien. Oh, that means alien, doesn't it? Oh, bad mistake. But by the time I was doing it, it was already out. That was the name, and it's the name today, even though we know now that it's not a child, not a child at all. Later we found out from the wear of the teeth of the human, we can see that her teeth were worn flat like a horse teeth. She died, by the way, between 35 and 45, somewhere in there. She was full up adult. But her teeth were very much ground down because 900 years ago in Mexico, it would have been grinding corn with stone, pestle, and mortar, or however it worked, and you'd get a lot of grit in your food and your teeth would get worn down. It was just a much tougher life in a high desert, very sandy, very gritty area. So what we find with the Starchild is that we have chips in the enamel. You can see those, you can see that. Tough wear on its teeth as well. Kids can't do that. Kids don't have their teeth long enough. Kids can't generate that kind of torque on their grinding to do that. But also we've got crazing. We've got signs of crazing in life. The dark lines that you see there, now there's white ones here, but crazing is chipping of the enamel by chewing very hard things like walnuts or ice, and a lot of it to crack it. And if you do it in life, and you get stains here, so you know this was done during life, so it was generating a lot of torque on its teeth as it was chewing hard things. But these, the white ones, they are post-mortem. They come after death. When you die, your teeth can dry out a little bit and leave those cracks. So you just have to know the difference. So later experts said, nah, it wasn't a kid. Why'd you call it a kid? It's not even close to a kid. And so, because we're idiots. That's why there was no, we're idiots, but there was no instruction manual. There's no guidebook here. We just had to kind of figure it out. And again, remember, I was not a UFO person. I didn't know what I was getting into, and I kind of had to feel along blindly. But I learned. Over time, we all learned, and I learned too. Okay, other x-ray we took. Now, as you see here, the sinuses, the frontal sinuses, this part right here. The eye sockets, frontal sinuses, Starchild completely missing, not the first sign, not a vestige, not anything, and also a very different eye socket, as you see. Very kind of weird look to it. So that was another sign that the guy said, no sinuses like this, man. You just don't see no sign. You can see small, you can see shriveled, but you just don't see nothing. This was an x-ray tech who had seen a lot of them, so that was pretty interesting. Now, here's this profile view, and it really shows the flatness, the absolute flatness of the rear of the human's head, but it also shows these veins here. And all that is on your brain, you have veins on the top of your brain, and because your bone is so soft when you're young, those veins leave an imprint in the bone that stay with you, obviously as you see forever. Same thing with the Starchild. You can see its convolutions here very clearly, but also you see its veins on its brain, so it wasn't water on the brain. Might have been, you can argue that it was pressure in the brain, but certainly not on the brain. So again, probably not hydrocephaly. Now this is a bottom side view, and you see the opening of the foramen magnums here are the same. Again, the Starchild, if it was having pressure problems in its head of hydrocephaly or the design, the faulty design that it has, where its neck opening is pushed forward under the dead center part of it so that it's centered up. And I should have said that. It's centered on that skinny little neck in a weird way, like a weird shaped golf ball. It's balanced front and rear and side to side. So it's absolutely designed weirdly. And you would think that that opening would be squeezed out to some degree, but it isn't. It's absolutely the same. It's normal. It's the size that it ought to be. Now, this is a CAT scan. Now, you hopefully know that a CAT scan is just electronic slices through the skull like this. And then you look at the pictures. You start here, and we're going to work our way through, and you see. And these openings indicate that there's no premature closing in any of the sutures. That's what we were looking for. And there was none. It was healthy and normal at the time of death, not a problem. We see those openings right through. But when we got down to this part, to the ears, to the inner ears, the guy that was doing it said, "Holy moly, what is that? Look at that. The inner ears, man, this thing has inner ears twice as big as what we normally have." And I said, "What do you suppose that means?" "I have no idea." "Well, what do you suppose it means? You've got a skinny little neck, you've got a very big head. If the inner ears are a balance mechanism for it, which we assume probably ours is, why would it need that much more balancing power?" Well, maybe to hold that big head up on that skinny little neck. Or maybe it comes from another place, different gravity, whatever. Don't know, but it's unusual for sure. Another one of those weird physiological differences. Now, human bone composition. Let's take a look at this. This is what human bone is normally made of, and this is the scanning electron microscope analysis of the human bone. You have carbon, you have oxygen, you have phosphorus, calcium, and all the other ones, sodium, magnesium, aluminum, silicon, sulfur, what is it, chlorine or whatever, calcium. No, that's calcium. Carbon, calcium. Yeah, it's other calcium. Sorry. Anyway, that's it. That's what it looks like. Very standard, very typical. All your bone looks like this. If you were to scan it, it would look basically like this. This is the Starchild's bone scanned. Look at the difference. Look at the carbon, oxygen, phosphorus. Look at the difference right here. You know what that is? Tooth enamel. Tooth enamel. It's much, much harder than human bone. Much harder. 2 to 3 times. We don't even know how much harder. It's just really, really harder. It is not human bone in that sense. It's got the components, but like everything else. It's got eye sockets, got ears, got a brain, but it's all mixed up. It's all jumbled. It's all completely different. But it's jumbled and mixed up and put together perfectly in a new package. Now, you would think that when science saw this, when we made that obvious, you would think science would have jumped on that like a 2-ton tick, would have been all over it. Why? Think how many billions there are to be made if they can pull out whatever is making this happen from the gene code, and they can make a serum or a shot or a pill or something to give to people in my generation. I'm on the leading edge of the baby boom, and all to come behind me, and maybe those that are there. Can you imagine the billions to be made if they could figure this out, if they could crack this nut? And they can crack this nut. If they work at it, they can crack that nut. So that's something just there alone. You would think science would jump all over it. But do they? No, they don't want to know about it. You think money runs everything. Money doesn't run everything. Fear runs everything. They are afraid of this. They are afraid of going against the grain because they know they're not supposed to be fooling around with aliens and UFOs or anything to do with it. And so they just pass on billions of dollars, potential billions of dollars. Now, that's not to say they're not going to do it. If we get this to the point where it's okay and acceptable and they're not going to be chastised by their peers or the government or whoever else for doing it, they will be literally fighting each other fang and claw to get at it, begging for pieces of it to work with. Watch and see. But for right now, we can't get them interested. Thank you. All right. Whoops, sorry, got to go back. So, right now, everything that I've just shown you, all these physiological differences, all these differences don't matter a bit to science. Not a bit. Because why? Because they can explain them away. How can they explain them away? Nature can do anything. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Nature can do anything. Wherever the physical world pushes the boundary a little farther beyond where they knew it up to that point, not a problem. Nature can do that. Nature can do anything. To science, it is exactly the same as Christians confronted with things they don't like. Well, God can do anything. God can do anything. Science competes with God with nature. You've got your God, He can do anything. We've got our nature, she can do anything. Standoff. Standoff. But in terms of me and the Starchild, the problem is I can't get a hearing because they just say, there's nothing to what you're doing. There's nothing to what you're doing because no matter how bizarre it all is and no matter how it stacks up, nature could do it and we don't have to pay attention to it. We do not have to pay attention to you. We do not have to pay attention to your data because nature can cover every base. One guy said to me toward the end of when I was doing this, one guy said to me, listen, I don't care if you stack up 10,000 of those differences, 10,000 of them, I'm still going to tell you nature can handle it. Nature can do it. And I do not have to and I do not want to bother with this. And he booted me out. Okay? And right then I knew this was hopeless. This was absolutely hopeless. There's only one way, and a friend told me. He said, look, there's only one thing they're going to listen to, and that's DNA. You have to get a DNA test that shows as big a difference as what you have here with these physiological differences. Because they will listen to DNA, they respect DNA. Why? Because DNA is math. It is math turned into biology, or biology turned into math, but they have great respect for that. DNA puts you on death row, DNA gets you off death row. No matter how many policemen have testified against you, if the DNA says you didn't do it, you walk. You are invulnerable if you get the right DNA answer, and that's what we needed. So, at the end of '99, I saw the skull, all that you saw with Ray and Melanie, that was in February of 1999. What you just saw, I accumulated in 1999. At the end of 1999, I was at a wall. I couldn't go any further. I had to get DNA. So, because the Starchild was 900 years old, it qualified as ancient DNA. And you have to understand, up to 50 years, that's fresh DNA. After 50 years, ancient DNA. Requires a whole different set of protocols to recover it because it's much more sensitive to contamination. Okay? You want to find out, who's the father of your child, or do a pregnancy test, or find a criminal who left this blood stain. It's easy. It's all fresh. It's right there. Easy to do. Not a problem. Ancient DNA, much tougher. But the Starchild and the other one were buried in a mine tunnel for 900 years, and that's like being in a climate-controlled storage locker. Basically, same temperature, no rain to leach minerals out of it, no sun to, it's the ideal burial circumstances for great preservation of the bone. So, a friend of mine in Canada, well, I have to say this, at the time in 1999, there were only 6 labs in the world that would do ancient DNA, only 6. I tried them all, every one of them laughed me out of the room. Not out of the room, off the phone or emails or whatever, however I contacted them. But they said, you must be kidding. You must be kidding. We wouldn't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole. I don't care what you paid us. This is ridiculous. Ancient, alien DNA. Forget about it. So I couldn't get anybody to do it that could have done the work. They could have done the work. So I I told a friend about it in Canada, and he says, well, I know a guy that's opening up a new forensic lab here at the University of British Columbia. Maybe he'll do it for you. Maybe he can find what it is and get a simple answer. If he can recover nuclear DNA, that's all they were looking for, able to do, nuclear DNA. If we can get nuclear DNA, we can know if it's a human, if it's a male or a female. If you get a recovery, that's it. You know what you have and you can stop worrying about it. And I said, okay, shoved all the chips out on the table. Let's find out what this thing is. Took it to that lab, and they said, yeah, well, we think we can do it. We'll do it for you. We think if it was buried in a mine tunnel, there should be good enough DNA there. We should be able to get a result. So they went after it, and this is what happened. They took out the first thing they took out was the occipital condyles right here, these parts. With the human, first attempt, boom, no problem. First attempt recovery. Human DNA, fresh, good looking, easy, no problem. All they were looking for was nuclear. This becomes important later, but at the time we didn't know. Then they take another piece, this right here, and they claim they get a recovery. 200 picograms out of what should have been 1,000 minimum. You shouldn't make a statement unless you get 1,000 picograms minimum. They got 200 picograms, and they said, okay, we have a result It's XY, it's a male, it's a human male, take it and go home. Now remember, we paid for this one, but they contaminated it. Did I say that already? They contaminated the first one. They just messed it up somehow. They didn't get a result and they said, we contaminated it. We need another piece, we'll try again, and that's what I gave them. So they said they got a result there. We paid for this, this is on their nickel now. And so they want me to go home and just, it's a human and that's it and forget about it. Now, understand, it's at the University of British Columbia. The word has gotten out. They are now under severe pressure from peers. What the hell are you doing dealing with, you know, alien UFO stuff? They're not saying that, but I'm hearing that. So it's an issue. So they say, well, okay, we'll do another and we'll take the tooth. The tooth is absolutely, this is that first x-ray I told you about, tooth is absolutely going to have prime DNA. I knew it was a mistake. I didn't want to give it, but they said, we won't do it unless you give us the tooth so that we know we'll get a recovery. I fought against giving that tooth as hard as I could, and I will always be chastised for this. Science is going to hate me for doing this, and I knew it when I did it. But at the time, my back was against the wall, and I didn't feel I had any choice. Again, miraculously, 200 picograms out of the 1,000 they need. XY, it's human. Take it and go home and forget about it. It's human. Now, in the Deep South, we have a term that describes somebody that is just done for. We call it a blowed up peckerwood. And I was a blowed up peckerwood. I had nowhere to turn here. This absolutely screwed the pooch, as the astronauts say. I was done for because I had gone on Art Bell at the time and announced this and had collected money, the $8 grand that we needed to do it, and did all that. So everybody's waiting for the answer. Everybody knows it's coming. Everybody knows when the schedule is. I have to do it. You know how it works. Rich is sitting there smiling. He knows I'm screwed. So I have to go and I have to say, this is what they say. This is what they say. I have to announce it to the world. I have to put it on my website. I have to do everything, or I cannot give the result. So I have to get there and I have to say what they say and I have to read this stuff off, and then in the best way I can, I have to say, but I think they're wrong. I think they made a mistake. And I have to say it diplomatically. I can't say, I think they just screwed me to get rid of me. I can't say that. But it turns out, really, that people in our field didn't want this to be real. This is scary for everybody. Everybody breathed a sigh of relief. Everybody, even people in the field of alternative knowledge. I couldn't get a hearing anymore. I couldn't get on radio. I couldn't, after I announced it, I couldn't get invited to speak about it. They would invite me to come speak about my human origins and the hominoids and the other stuff that I was really good at and well known for. Nobody wanted to hear about the Starchild. Starchild was old news, and I'd try to say, but I'm sure they're wrong. No, sorry. For 3 years, for the next 3 years, all of 2000, all of 2001, all of 2002, I'm swimming uphill against a really strong tide. I am hemorrhaging money, putting it on credit cards. Ran up $50,000 worth of debt, always thinking the next time somebody's going to listen, so it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And ultimately, I just had to go bankrupt, and that was it. I was a blowed up peckerwood. So at the end of 2002, I put out an email to the list, which was about 2,000 people at that time, and I said, look, it's over, I'm done, I can't go anymore, I'm completely stymied, that's it. And then a miracle happened. The woman that's sitting out there at the table, Belinda McKenzie, wrote me an email and she said, I've recently come into some money, I've been following your case, I want to know the answer to what you have. I want to know what that thing is. Give me a price, give me a figure, and let me see if I can cover it. So by then, there were not just 6 labs doing ancient DNA recovery, there were 24, 2 whole dozen. And boy, it wasn't long before I found a pair of young men who had just started theirs, Trace Genetics at the University of California at Davis, Jason Eshelman and Rip and Molly, and they said, we'll do it. We want the business, we'll do it. They were young, had nothing to lose, they had good reputations, they had worked on the Kennewick man, they had worked on the Sam Shepard exhumation case, they were well known as up-and-comers. They felt they could handle it, and they did. So I said, well look, let me let you understand this. I made a big mistake sending the skull to Canada and just hoping they would do the right thing, because they didn't. I'm coming and I'm going to be there and I'm going to watch and make sure. They said, nothing to hide. You come, you do whatever you want. We're going to give you an answer if there's an answer to be gotten. And these guys could recover it properly and recover not only nuclear DNA, but mitochondrial DNA. So we were going to be in good shape with these guys. So summer of 2003, we're ready to begin our process. But before we go there, I want to show you, we're going to do some other stuff. What on earth, Starchild? I just want to give you this quote. In 40 years of practice as a reconstructive plastic surgeon, I've never seen anything like it. I doubt if anyone else has either. Ted is the guy that hooked me up with the lab. But Ted is a very strong supporter of this because he is a craniofacial plastic surgeon. He was interested. He spent 6 weeks trying to find any kind of deformity that matched up even close with what the Starchild's combination of effects was. And he said at the end of that time, I'm convinced you've got something really special here and I'll help you. And he has to this day. And by the way, if the article comes out in the Daily Mail as it was supposed to on Wednesday and it keeps getting put off for reasons we don't understand, something's going on, Ted should be quoted in it because they wanted to talk to him. Anyway, so in those 3 years, those dead 3 years, a lot of things happened and I started getting some very interesting information. This is a book, A Visual Guide to Alien Beings by David Chase, and what David did up to 97 was he called anybody that was saying that they had seen an alien. He didn't make any judgments. He didn't care if they were cranks or wackos or whatever. Just tell me what you think you saw, and he would draw it. And he found that they clustered into groups. The little blue men that look kind of like fire plugs, they were the rarest and are the rarest, but they do exist. I was giving this lecture in New Zealand, and as many times as I've shown this, a woman just shrieked out of the audience, "Oh my God, that's what I've been trying for 20 years to tell people I saw, and nobody believes me, thank God," like that. So, but anyway, everybody knows the small grays, the tall grays, the human types, the Lyrans, Pleiadians, Anunnaki, whatever you want to call them, the reptilians that he has in a robe, and there's the insectoids that should be here as well. I asked him why he did this and put it in a robe and left the insect out, and he said, "Geez, man, I didn't want to scare people off with a really bad cover." So it made sense. But anyway, also it turns out that there are supposed to be hybrids between the tall grays and the Lyrans, Pleiadians, Anunnakis, and that's this, and also between these and the reptilians, or the tall ones and the reptilians, I'm not sure, but to produce a kind of hybrid there. All speculation, no proof, understand, but interesting. And this is just another tall gray, another version, just to show that, it's not just, David doesn't have the last word. That book will be out there on the table, though. You can kind of come thumb through it and see all the strange drawings that they have. Just a little interesting sidelight. The main thing I want to talk about, though, is harvesting. And we all know the story of harvesting. It's where women, young women, claim they're taken on board, made pregnant. They're definitely pregnant. They come back, they get a sonogram. They know they're pregnant. They've missed periods. They're usually it's twins. Not usually, but frequently it's twins. And then in the 4th month, they will be taken on board or whatever, and they wake up with every sign of a miscarriage and no fetus. They've been harvested. And then some years later, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, they're taken on board and they're shown these little waif-like children, hybrid children, generally scraggly, thin blonde hair. This is a very accurate depiction from a movie of what these women consistently describe as seeing. They're hybrid children, and they believe it's theirs. They come to believe. They're told, apparently, bond, spend some time, this is your kid, get to know it, connect with it, and they do. And they come out of that experience with varying degrees of memory. As you may have heard, they supposedly put memory screens on you so that you can remember next to nothing, you can remember some, you can remember more. It's an individual thing. But anyway, a woman named Josie Galante, who was an artist in Taos, New Mexico, contacted me and she said, I was made pregnant in 1990 and I was harvested in 1990, and in 1995 I was taken on board and I saw a 5-year-old boy that I'm sure was mine. I'm convinced, and I drew his picture. Would you like to see it? So she sent it to me, and this is what she sent. And it looks, it's pretty good. I, would make a few changes, but not really bad at all relative to the Starchild, as you see. Quite a little fit. 1995, 1999, this became public. Now, another interesting one is this. This was 1978, a lawyer, male lawyer, who had the money to do this, got a sculptor. He had a good memory of it too. And this is interesting in that it has the correct, I think, kind of eyelids, because for that, the eyes of the Starchild, you've got to have a much bigger lid to get down to cover over the eye placed much lower in the face. Nose could be pretty good, but the Starchild, I should have pointed out it didn't, it has no brow ridge, and the nose just goes absolutely straight. There's no brow ridge in the Starchild, and the nose drops straight down, as you'll see with the copy. So it's very different. The neck is a little large, I think, but the ears are about right. The cheekbones, I think, are a little too large, but it's in the ballpark, certainly in the ballpark. Now, here we see them together, and it's pretty interesting that the combination works out like that. 1978, 1995, 1999. Now, this is a cone head. People ask me, are there any other skulls like the Starchild in the world? I probably get all the weird skulls sent to me, none that I know of. Nothing like the Starchild. But the cone heads, yes. There are hundreds of cone heads, different places in the world. Dominate in Peru because in the Atacama Desert it's just very, very dry. Probably rains there once every 10 years or something. So there are plenty of those skulls in museums in Peru. What is unique about them, though, is that their brains fill their heads. This is not an x-ray of this one, but as you see, the veins go right up through. Those heads are full of brain. Now, what does that mean? What does science say about this? So every time you see them, you hear their answer. They are deformed. They are deliberately bound, head bound. They're deliberately deformed, right? By head binding. Now, the problem is the brains in these skulls are twice the size of ours. They average 2,800 to 3,000 cubic centimeters. Remember, we are 1,400. There's no amount of head binding that is going to double the size of your brain. There is no amount of head binding that is going to double the size of your brain. Yet all the cone heads have brains out to that size, and they're full of brain. Now, I've been saying for 10 years, and I'll say it here, these guys ought to be DNA tested just like the Starchild and everybody else, because I'll bet you, even though they have very human-like faces, these are not entirely human. They can't be. They can't be. Something's very different about them. But this is also an answer that science doesn't want. Just like they don't want to deal with the Starchild, they don't want to deal with the cone heads. That is just the reality of the situation. Next slide. Okay, variations on a theme, and you see. Pretty interesting. Now, in addition to these people contacting me and telling me their stories and informing me in those 3 years, I also got some examples of what people thought the Starchild might look like. And this is one of the first ones that came off of a cover of a magazine in 1999. And the guy told me he took his daughter, little daughter, and morphed her face to fit me. He said, you know, boy, it's really hard. It doesn't match up right. And I said, yeah, it really doesn't, does it? So he morphed her as best he could to give that look, which I thought was kind of cool and still do. Interesting look anyway. This is some artists began, this is Bill McDonald's attempt right here on the left. Now, we've all seen these eyes on a very bad Sunday morning after a really difficult Saturday night. We know those eyes, but they're not really Starchild eyes because the lids aren't right. Look at the size of the neck, no dent. He missed everything. Bill did, frankly, not a good job. This is Katie Lynn, an Oriental girl, and she turned it into a female, which is cool and okay, but I think she did a lot better job with the eyes and the lids. Nose might be. The jaw's too heavy. The neck's good, though. But, you know, we're getting there. We're getting there. This is a guy named Mark Savee, and Mark came up with this idea, which I thought was pretty good, but it came up again. The jaw's too heavy. He missed the dent in the crown. Ears might be okay. I like his nose, though. I think the nose is about right. Interesting, but it came out to be a pretty interesting look, except, again, a perfectly human mouth, very long fro from the nose to the lips, and much too heavy in the jaw. All right? Then came a guy named Rob Roy Menzies, and Rob Roy was great. He was in Alaska. Rob Roy's good, too. He's a good artist. He got the bright idea of putting it onto the x-ray and building a face like here. And when he sent me this, I said, well, could you make it a little less constipated looking? Because, you know, he just looks through it like that. Can you do something with that look? And so he came up with this one on the left, and I said, God, Rob Roy, it's ugly enough to make a freight train take a dirt road. Can you do anything with it? And so he came up with this thing here, and which is not that bad, I think. You know, kind of close. The mouth is a little better. The eyes are not so crazed. But we worked on it a little more, and we finally got to this, which I was pretty happy with. Got the dent, got the eyes. We're not sure about the black, but, you know, everything is pretty good in this one, I think. Now, the reason I have it lined up against the famous communion picture, you all know the communion picture, off the famous book, I hope, by Whitley Strieber, Communion, largest selling book in the history of our field, and it became the iconic picture of a gray alien because of that. Now, in 2007, Bud Hopkins, who's one of the top researchers in the field of regression and studying abductions, Bud wrote an article for MUFON Journal that came out, and you're nodding at it. Yeah, it's a great story. That when the book was handed in to the publisher, they commissioned the artist to bring in a depiction of the alien the aliens that Whitley wrote about. And he came in with this, and boy, they said, wow, this thing, look how dramatic that is. That's going to jump off the cover. That's going to sell millions of copies. Except it didn't look like what Whitley described. Problem. But they didn't care. They just, boy, this thing is going to sell, and they did. And they put it on the cover, and it went out, and it did. It sold millions. A great, dramatic cover. But it doesn't look like the way Gray's are described. So what Bud said he and the other researchers started to do was they made lemonade out of that lemon. They started using it as a litmus test. Somebody would say they've seen an alien. They'd hand that picture to them and say, this is what you saw. And if they said, yeah, they knew right away that person was probably not being truthful. But if they went to a person who said they had had an abduction experience and they showed them that picture and they said, well, no, that's not really what I saw. Right away they knew, this person could well be telling the truth. This takes courage when you're looking at something you know you're supposed to say, that's it, and you have to say it's not. And I think that's very, very clever of them, and I don't know why Bud, did that. But not many people have read that article. I probably have notified more people just in these.
I just found it recently. What I thought he said though was that the artist got it mostly right, but screwed up the top of the head.
Well,
it made it, look like a developmentally disabled alien.
The top, but also it was a little long here as well. From mid face to down is a little long too, relatively speaking. Anyway, supposedly the description, is more like this than that for sure. However we want to call it, but it's a fun article and you can read it pretty easily. So there's that. Then there's this. The UFO Hunters is the most recent television show we've been on. This was only in the last 3 or 4 months. You can see it on Google. And when the UFO Hunter guys called me and we were talking about it, it's the most favorable handling that we've had yet. They said, we want to do a sculpture. We want to make a sculpture of it. And I said, well, the problem is you're not going to get a forensic sculptor that's going to have anywhere in his knowledge base how to build an alien face. I would have to be there with him for the whole time he's building it, looking over his shoulder like I did with Rob Roy to get a face that's going to look right. I said, we can't afford that. We can't afford 2 weeks for you with an artist, a forensic artist to do it. Sorry, we're on a limited budget. You know how these things work. And so they contacted a very top guy in New Jersey. He said he wanted $8,000 to do it, which is a very reasonable price. They weren't going to pay that, so they called to Universal Studios and they got a model maker in Hollywood there to do it for $2,000. And because he was just up the road, they would have had to fly everybody to New Jersey and do all that. The guy was just stacking. It was going to be too expensive. So the model maker, and I'm not saying he did a horrible job, but he did put a human face, as I said he would, on the big head. I said, it's just going to be a big head with a human face underneath it. Do you recognize this guy? Does he look familiar at all? Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy that killed President Kennedy. Lee Harvey, yeah, kind of sad. Anyway, this is a little more reasonable perhaps. This is an ad that was famous at one time called the Amoco ad. It was for Amoco gas. And when this came out, they were saying, boy, somebody slipped Amoco the real deal, and they used it as a model for it. I don't say that it is necessarily, but it's an interesting look with the 4 fingers and all that. This is another interesting look that comes out of a film, and the nose, I like the nose. The nose looks good right in here relative to the Starchild lack of brow ridges and all that, the mouth, the narrow face and all this. This looks really pretty good. The big black eyes thing, let's talk about those for a minute. Those could easily be lenses, soft contacts so that they can see in ultraviolet light or infrared light or whatever. They're not necessarily their eyes. Just could be like their form of sunglasses or something. So keep that in mind. This is again variations on a theme. But now again, we have, excuse me, too fast. Again, with the variations on a theme, we're back to the DNA. We're now back to the DNA, and we're going to the lab to get it. Now, you need to understand several things about DNA. DNA comes from, you know, the genetic material in your body, and you start by recovering some of it from a piece of bone. So we had to cut bone at that lab. We cut it, and we found out that it was very, very hard. I don't really have time to go through the whole deal, but just the geneticists found out that it was very hard to cut. And so they said, here, they cut a piece out, and as you see, remember I told you it was half as thick, and they cut this window of bone out, cut it into 4 pieces, and cut another window here and cut it into 4 pieces. And obviously, you see that the Canadians did not need nearly all the bone that they took. They said, oh my God, why did you do that? And I said, again, I didn't know what I was doing. There's no instruction manual. I was just trusting people that were supposed to know what they were doing, and they didn't, which happens. So they were loath to criticize their peers, but anyway, they said that was not a good thing. So they cut it into 4 pieces, and what you do is you take the little piece of bone, and you put it in a test tube, and you put it in a liquid called EDTA. And you put that test tube in a rocker arm, and it rocks for a week, and human bone is gone, totally dissolved. EDTA dissolves human bone in a week. They put the Starchild bone in in a different test tube, but the same EDTA, put it in a rocker arm, not unchanged in a week, unchanged in 6 weeks, unchanged in 3 months, unchanged in 6 months. They quit after 6 months. No change. Not human bone. Again, remember, it is tooth enamel. But it's also got something else that we're going to talk about in a minute. Okay, so there was a detergent called Tween 20 that they could use, very powerful detergent. They put the bone, when they saw it wasn't going to dissolve in EDTA, they put it in the Tween 20, dissolved it overnight. No problem. They had their sample ready to go to work. Meanwhile, they said, you need to take this very hard bone and get it tested, get some tests run on it, and we did. So we took it, and this is the saw blade, the Dremel blade had blown this powder up into the cancellous holes, and the bone is the cortical layers here, cortical layer here, and cancellous holes here. This is where your marrow goes. So you see all these little chips of the powder. But you also see these hairy-like things, these fuzzy-like things. These are fibers, folks, and they are completely unknown in any other bone in the world. They are unknown, not seen in anything. Here's a close-up of this one. We call it the knot. We don't really understand it, but you can see that these fibers are buried in the matrix of the bone, and somehow the blade did this, and there are different kinds. There's the thin kind, the thick kind. Here's some more of the thin kind here. They are a huge mystery, these fibers, but they are also very durable, as we'll see. Now, this is where the blade was cutting through, and it slowed up a little bit, and it curled here, and so we have the fibers here, like that. The stuff you see here is just powder on them, powder. I mean, this is a cut one, fibers. Fiber going into the matrix of the bone, back where it came from, different kind. And we checked with mycologists to see if it would be a fungi, bacteria, mold, not so, couldn't be. So it's just weird. There's no other way for it. Here's one buried clearly into the matrix of the bone. You can't miss that one. These fibers are, again, science should have jumped on this like a 2-ton tick too to find out what they are. Never seen them before. Great mystery. Don't care. Not interested. Nature can do anything. So this is one that's been cut off and snagged on the bone, but what it's interesting is you can see that it's sheared. These fibers are tremendously, tremendously durable. This netting that's woven through the bone, that's why it's so hard to cut. Because a Dremel blade would cut my wrist off like it wasn't there, and yet they resisted it. Okay, interesting. All right, now another guy, when we had this result, it was so exciting, said, let's take it to somebody else and get a different set of tests done. And he said, I want you to cut it with a diamond-coated Dremel blade to get a much cleaner cut and see if we can cut those fibers out, which he did. Then he also, and you see that it has much finer powder in the cancellous holes, just a completely different cut. Then he snapped a corner off of each of the samples, snapped, and polished them with lapidary tools that you polish jewels with, okay? So when he did that, and he was doing it on purpose, this is what it looks like for human bone right here. You see the cancellous holes, it looks like alabaster. It's pretty, it's like a jewel. And the cancellous holes are perfectly clean because when you die, bacteria reduces you down to nothing and it eats up all of your marrow, and you can eat out of these holes in normal situation, and in the human that was the case. But with the Starchild, it was a little different. The polishing came out looking very milky because it has so much more collagen in it, we found out. So much more collagen. Again, tooth enamel. You can see the difference. It's just absolutely unmistakable. But also, you see this little red speck. That puzzled him. What was that? Because it shouldn't be there. More red specks. You see them? Red specks. They don't belong. Nothing should be there. We don't know. The red specks are every bit, the red residue is every bit as weird. It's not marrow because when blood oxidizes, it turns black. We don't know what it is. It's just like the fibers, and we don't have the money to have these things tested because we'd have to pay for both the protocols to be developed to recover it and then pay for the testing, and we don't have the money to live, much less do all this stuff. And every time I ask for money for testing, you can go on the internet and see. Every time I ask for money for testing, the first thing the critics and the skeptics say is, oh, you can't believe a word he says because he's into it for the money. You have to take a vow of poverty to do this work and get away with it. It's very, they make it so hard to do this. This is a backlit view of it, and you see how much of it there is. There's plenty to work with. The testing on this is going to be like the testing on Otzi the Iceman when they're finally allowed to do it, when they finally have to acknowledge that this thing is real and what it is. Now, as far as that acknowledgement goes, we need a DNA test, and I can finish in about 5 minutes, I think, if I really work it. You have to understand macro to micro in 5 steps. Human body contains 100 trillion cells. There is a nucleus inside each human cell. Each nucleus contains 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. 1 chromosome of every pair is from each parent. The chromosomes are filled with tightly coiled strands of DNA. Genes are segments of DNA that contain instructions to make proteins, the building blocks of life. There's one more that goes out here. Base pairs arrayed in genes. Thymine, adenine, guanine, cytosine. These two go together, these two go together. And they are the building blocks of the genetic code of the genome. In the nucleus of all of us, except for our red blood cells, there are 3 billion base pairs, approximately 3 billion base pairs. Keep that number in mind. All right, nuclear and mitochondrial DNA. When you cover DNA, you can cover 2 types. There's this mitochondria, there's the cell, there's the cytoplasm, and there's the nucleus here, and that comes from mom and dad. Remember the 23 chromosomes from each? The whole 3 billion is in here. Out here are the mitochondria, and they're about 16,000 base pairs long, 16,000. They come only from females. So the mitochondria that you carry in your body comes from your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your great-great-great-great, back hundreds of generations with very slight changes. That's how they know that we exist as a species only about 200,000 years by clocking the changes in our mitochondrial DNA. We're very new on this planet, as we are as I'm standing here talking to you. All right, when you do gel sheets, you've all seen it on TV and movies. They squirt the sample out into the gel sheet, and it takes up wherever it belongs. And through a miracle of science, they know what's what. They're able to read it, and they're able to tell different things. Now, we're going to look at the real ones from the Starchild and the adult mitochondrial DNA. The adult, as you see, and here's what they do to tell in real life that they have a working gel sheet. They put the experimenter's DNA in. That's Jason Eshelman's DNA. And these little nicks here that you see are called primer-dimer, just to make sure the gel sheet's working and that they have a live one. This is the adult's mitochondrial DNA. It's from haplogroup A, a very common Mesoamerican group, not a problem. Haplogroup A, nothing unusual about it. With the Starchild, its mother, its mitochondrial DNA, its mother, grandmother, right on back, is haplogroup C. Primer-dimer, Jason Eshelman's DNA. But this combination of 4 is haplogroup C, which means we were wrong up until then to assume that that woman with the Starchild was the mother. We assumed that dramatic thing, hand on arm, had to be the mother. Not so. Not its mother. Friend, caretaker, lover, something, not mother. Big surprise for us here. Now, the nuclear DNA. This is the big one. Nice, clear recovery, no problem. Jason Eshelman, and this is the human. Very different than Jason, as you see, but human, no problem. First time, just as in Canada, easy recovery, and as you see, bright and clear, no degradation. This is prime time DNA. No problem, right? So now it's time to do the Starchild. This is it, the money shot. All the chips out on the table, make or break. This is it. This is it. What is it? Jason Eshelman's, primer-dimer, and in 6 attempts, no recovery. Not 1 attempt, not 2, 6 attempts, no recovery. What does it mean? Mom is human. We know mom's human. Got her mitochondrial DNA. Mom's human. Dad is not. Dad is not human. Now, the problem was in 203 with primers, all they could say is, we know you have something here, but we can't say how far he is, the Starchild's father or the Starchild itself, and we don't know if it's male or female. We don't know how far away it is. And we can't tell you. So we can't say anything other than you've got something here, but you're going to have to sit on it for 3 to 5 years. Because we know there's technology underway because they want to recover the Neanderthal's genome. You're going to have to wait three more years, 5 more years. Oh, God. But I did. I've sucked it up, and here I am. In 2006, 3 years later exactly, 454 Life Sciences in Branford, Connecticut announces that they can do it. They can do it. But we can't pay for it because they've been working on the Neanderthal ever since. They're up in the range of $10 million now in the last 2.5 years, and we couldn't do it. But now, today, if we had the money, it would cost $250,000 and we could have an answer in 3 to 4 months. Right? It's within reach now. And I had a deal worked out with a British production company to do it in the latter part of last year. And then the economy collapsed and the deal is unraveled. And now what the British and the world companies are saying, you pay for the testing, we'll be happy to do the filming. Well, that's stupid because it's just, you know, you're just paying them to take over your whole project. Not going to do that. We're going to get all the money and produce it ourselves. There's no point. You know, I don't need them if I get the money for the test. I might as well get it all. It would be stupid to do otherwise. But we're going to do that. Why? Why do we have to film it? Because if there's ever a test that every step has to be filmed, this is it. Because if we get the answer we know we're going to get, the first thing they're going to say is, well, you must have done something wrong because we don't accept this answer. This can't be true. But if we've got the filmed record of it and we show every single step was done properly, they can't argue. We can beat them with this, folks. We can absolutely win. And when we do that, I'll tell you what we're going to get. We're going to get an answer that'll be significantly away from 0. Okay? Because a chimp is 3% away from human. A gorilla is 5%. A chimp is 97% the same. Gorilla is 95% the same. The Neanderthal is going to fall somewhere within that 0 and that 3%. Somewhere in there, the Neanderthal will fall. When you look at the physiological differences of the Starchild, you've seen how many I've stacked up. Every one of those is a suite of genes that are different from a human being. I am betting that it's going to be probably beyond 3%, could be 5%, could be 10%. It could be so far that there's not even a blink of a question that this is an alien. Scientists say to me, people say to me, well, how are you going to say it's an alien when there's no alien to compare it against? I'm going to give them the alien to compare it against. I can do it. Now, I will tell you, if that answer comes in at 99.5, you know, where it's only a 0.5% difference, there's going to be some arguing then. If it comes in at 1%, now remember, humans have to fall within 99.99. We're all very much alike. So you can argue it at a 0.5%, but at 1%, it gets a lot harder for them to argue and a lot easier for us to argue. If we slip over wherever the Neanderthal is, you see what I mean? 1, 2, in that range. But I think based on the amount of physiological differences, and if you extrapolate that down through the whole body, I think we're going to do it. And I think it's going to be a huge difference, an undoubtable difference, and I think we're going to win this. In fact, I'm sure of it. If you can't get the hardback book here, if you want to order it later, go online and want to, it's Amazon.com. But I urge you, if you can, get the hardback. It'll have some value to you. This is going to be it. This is the smoking gun. This is what all of you have been waiting for all these years. This is it. It's coming down the pipe. Look for it. It'll be here. Thank you very much.